think Islam has some specific ideas that are really problematic, which we discuss in the book. Specifically, a belief in martyrdom and a belief in jihad as incumbent upon any Muslim, certainly any Muslim male, in defense of the faith, and a certainty of paradise. I mean, these are dark jewel of religious demagoguery that I think we have to figure out some way to destroy intellectually. And the disproportionate nature of the problem here. To be gay or even a woman in a country like Afghanistan or Saudi Arabia or Bangladesh, I mean, these are unlucky places to be.
I'll ask you bluntly what you ask in the book, which is Islam a religion of war or peace?
Well, I'll take the first whack at that. I think we have different instincts, I think, Majid and I here, and my instincts for many conversations now are to defer to his instincts, because I think I had no interest in winning the debate for atheism against religion in my conversation with Majid. I was not trying to convince him that there is no God or that it's illegitimate intellectually to think that the Quran is in some sense, a divinely inspired book. That's not my purpose, and though I still hold those views, the real purpose of our collaboration is to figure out some path forward, politically and intellectually and ethically, to arrive at a future where we're not seeing the kind of mayhem and callousness and divisiveness born of religious differences. And so, but Majid takes the line in the book that it's neither a religion of war nor a religion of peace, it's a religion. And all religions have their toxic and their benign aspects. And it really depends on just what you emphasize. I'm a little more, I think if you just catch Majid at that moment, if that's all he says, what he's saying is indistinguishable from many apologists who are actually playing hide the ball with the articles of faith here. People like Reza Aslan and people who are well known to just dodge the matter and who think that it is tantamount to bigotry to single out Islam for any special attention at this moment in history. But Majid doesn't stop there, and that's why I had such a productive conversation with him. He admits that there's a link between specific ideas and specific behaviors. And so I think Islam has some specific ideas that are really problematic, which we discuss in the book. Specifically, a belief in martyrdom and a belief in jihad as incumbent upon any Muslim, certainly any Muslim male, in defense of the faith. And a certainty of paradise. I mean, this is a little dark jewel of religious demagoguery that I think we have to figure out some way to destroy intellectually. This conversation is, I think, the basis of a way forward in that direction.
So on the same question, but I want to touch on something Sam said earlier about this notion that any Muslim engaging in dialogue with a critic of Islam, with an atheist, with somebody like Sam or Ayan, is necessarily either a sellout, an Uncle Tom, a native informant, or any of the above. Yesterday, by a non-Muslim, left-wing, white, and particularly silver-spooned critic, I was called an Islamophobe. I want to address this head on before we proceed, if I may, because I think it's disgusting to delegitimize my voice in that way. And what I would like to say to them, and I hope they're listening, is the day that you have had to dodge neo-Nazi hammer attacks on the streets of Essex, as I have, the day that you've been arrested at gunpoint and profiled by police at the age of 15, as I have, the day that you've forcibly had your DNA taken from you and profiled at airports, as I have, and the day that you face the grip of a torturer in Egypt's dungeons because of your Islamist political views, as I have, is the day you get to talk to me about Islamophobia. The day you were born to Muslim parents, are a Muslim yourself and have a Muslim child, is the day you get to talk to me about anti-Muslim bigotry. until that day, being a non-Muslim, and particularly being a white male, to speak to me and to police my conversation about my own religion and its future in this world, and to choose for me who I'm allowed to speak to, is a form of colonial patronage that I could do without. It's a reverse form of racism. It's a policing of the conversation. It's born of a racism of low expectations, because it assumes that it's the true good Muslim, bad Muslim game, by the way, because it assumes the only good Muslim is the angry Muslim, and there happens to be a bit of a brain malfunction in the heads of these people who assume that despite the fact I've been through all of that, I'm not sitting here in front of you ranting and raving and spitting and frothing at the mouth. Therefore, because I'm not angry, somehow I'm not the good Muslim. It's patronizing in the extreme. And in particular, as I said, the two people who have named, Sam's, I think, mentioned one of them, the two people who have called me a native informant or an Uncle Tom or an Islamophobe, both happen to be non-Muslim, white, middle-class American males who haven't seen any of what I've just described. And I think they need to just stop and check their privilege, first of all. And it's sad that the debate has got to this. To very quickly answer your question, therefore, I have a right to have a view on that question. And that question, whether Islam is a religion of peace or a religion of war, for some Muslims, it's a religion of war. For the vast majority of Muslims today, it's a religion of peace. Just like for the US, for Americans, for some Americans, the US Constitution supports the right to abortion, and for others it doesn't. The same document, the same text, is the subject of dispute and fierce dispute in this instance. And one of the things that we discuss in this dialogue is that actually if Islam is only what Muslims make it through the process of ijtihad or interpretation, if the vast majority of Muslims today are not jihadists, then only because that's what Muslims are interpreting it to be, today it happens to be by majority rule a religion of peace. But that's not to say that there is an incredibly vocal and disproportionately prominent minority within our own communities of Muslims who subscribe to the view not only that it's a religion of jihad and war, but are actually fighting and engaged in that war. And it's that vocal and organized, highly organized minority, as represented by ISIS, in some instances they're controlling countries, that we must challenge head on and accept the fact they exist and not obfuscate and bury our heads in the sand and pretend that this isn't really a problem.
The Quran itself contains verses that extremists have historically taken literally. For example, Surah 9:111 promises believers paradise in exchange for fighting and killing in the cause of Allah. Surah 8:12 talks about striking fear into the hearts of unbelievers. These aren't fringe interpretations. They're written directly into the text, and history shows that when taken literally, they inspire violence. We can see this pattern throughout Islamic history. The early Islamic conquests of the 7th and 8th centuries spread by the sword, from Arabia into North Africa, Spain, and Persia. These weren't peaceful conversions. They were military campaigns justified by jihad. Fast forward to today, and groups like ISIS, Al-Qaeda, and Boko Haram cite these same texts as their blueprint. This isn't comparable to Christianity or Judaism in the same way. Yes, the Bible contains violent passages, but modern Christian majority societies don't have widespread movements killing in God's name. By contrast, Pew Research surveys show large percentages of Muslims in countries like Afghanistan, 99%, and Iraq, 91%, supporting Sharia law as the official law of the land, including punishments like stoning for adultery or death for apostasy. The science of radicalization also backs this up. Studies from scholars like Robert Pape at the University of Chicago found that suicide terrorism is most heavily concentrated in Islamic groups because of the religious promise of reward in the afterlife. That dark jewel Harris describes, martyrdom leading to paradise, isn't an abstract idea. It's the single most powerful recruiting tool jihadists use, especially for young men with few opportunities.
And I hope everyone's read the books. Those of you who haven't read those books, there's a bad guy in the Harry Potter books called Voldemort. That people, the two things. First of all, they deny he exists, and they're also, while denying that he exists, because he's meant to be dead, but he actually isn't really dead. The second thing is they're too scared to name him. So instead what they say is, he who must not be named is dead. Now, I took that and said, look, that Voldemort effect, being too scared, too petrified to name the problem when actually it's staring at you in the face, is what's happened with Islamist extremism. And the problem is we have been unable to name the problem, led by President Obama himself all the way down. Whereas actually recently, Prime Minister Cameron, not least because we've been working through Quilliam very hard to advise him on this, but among many others, has named the Islamist ideology just last month in his speech and his intervention on this debate. I'm hoping the next president of the US does the same. What's the problem with not being able to name the problem? There are two problems here. External to Muslims and within Muslim communities. If we can't name Islamist extremism and we just say the ideology of extremism, the problem is that outside of Muslim communities, many non-Muslims will assume you're talking about Islam, the religion itself, and all Muslims. That's the first problem, because by not naming it, you're blurring those lines and you're increasing the obfuscation. And trust me, there are a whole bunch of nut jobs out there who would take delight, who would take pleasure in stigmatizing every single Muslim, which Sam doesn't do, nor does Ayaan. They don't do that. I've personally spoken to both of them about this, and in many instances watched their speeches. But there are plenty of people out there that would like to do this. So that's danger number one. By not naming it and isolating it from the religion, you're blurring those lines and making it easier for people to blame every single Muslim. The danger within Muslim communities is that by not naming the problem, we are disempowering the voices of those reforming Muslims who are attempting and struggling, who are vulnerable within their own communities and who are struggling to bring about that reform dialogue within Muslim communities. We are disempowering their voices. We are not allowing them to make the case within the religion of Islam to say, the problem isn't Islam, fair enough, but there is something we have to address. And that something is this Islamist ideology that has hijacked our voice. But actually, by depriving them of that language, what are they left to say? How are they meant to have that debate? And instead what happens is every gay Muslim, every feminist Muslim, every liberal Muslim, every dissenting voice is silenced, is shut down, is stigmatized, and those who shout the loudest are the ones dominating the discourse. And then we complain when mainstream society says, where are the moderates? We're not even giving them a lexicon to have this conversation.
Sam, did you want to pick up on that?
Yeah, well, I think we should be candid about how depressing the state of the conversation is around this conversation. Because, for instance, I think at one point you said to me that you either expected or in fact were receiving more criticism with regard to talking to me than talking to Islamists or even
Absolutely,
jihadists.
yeah.
So he could go and talk to a failed suicide bomber, right?
And everyone's happy.
And that's completely legitimate use of his time, and of course we need to have conversations. How else could we move forward? But talking to famous atheists over here, that's as controversial as it gets. And that is of a piece with this liberal or pseudo-liberal criticism that both of us are getting on this topic, where people can't seem to see that, for one, that we're talking about ideas and their consequences. And everything we say about Islam or Islamism or jihadism, or depending on what the focus is, conservative Islam, applies to white converts to the faith, and it applies to people in 100 different countries and of a wide variety of ethnicities. If ever I say something disparaging about Islam compared to Hinduism or Buddhism, well, then that has nothing to do with racism or the colors of people's skin. I mean, so racism and bigotry against people based on ethnicity or the country they're born, that has nothing to do with this conversation at all. And so this meme of Islamophobia that has been thrown up to prevent conversations of this kind is really quite destructive. And it's something that, I mean, the hypocrisy here should be just shattering to liberals in particular, because you have, as Maja just said, we are abandoning the women and the freethinkers and the gays and the public intellectuals and the apostates these are the most vulnerable people on earth in Muslim societies, where you have atheist bloggers, or not even atheist bloggers, just secular bloggers.
People like Raif Badawi.
Getting hacked to death, and liberals are not only not giving them any tools by which to better their lives, they are castigating the people who are trying to shine a light on the disproportionate nature of the problem here. To be gay or even a woman in a country like Afghanistan or Saudi Arabia or Bangladesh. I mean, these are unlucky places to be in a minority of that kind. And so it's as we argue at some length in the book, liberalism has really failed us here. And it's not, and you can criticize Christianity all you want, and liberals will never bat an eye. You can criticize Mormonism all you want, but the moment you try to shine a light on the problem of, I think, appropriately described as Islamism for this conversation, just the full armamentarium of political correctness and cries of racism just hits you full in the face, and it is a thankless job. Nobody wants to do this. Nobody wants to have this conversation because it is so poisonous, especially on college campuses.
History shows that ideologies grow stronger when society pretends they don't exist. For example, the Nazi Party in the 1920s was often dismissed as a fringe group until it was too late. With Islamism, the same mistake is happening. We have leaders, like President Obama at the time, who avoided even using the word. Yet groups like ISIS openly cite the Quran, including Surah 9:5. Slay the polytheists wherever you find them, as their justification. If we don't name this ideology, we give it cover. The facts back this up. Pew Research surveys show that in countries like Pakistan, 76% of Muslims support making Sharia the law of the land, and large percentages endorse punishments like death for leaving Islam. In Saudi Arabia, women cannot travel, marry, or work without male guardianship, a system enforced through religious law. Homosexuality is still punishable by death in Iran and Saudi Arabia. By refusing to call this Islamism, Western liberals silence reformist Muslims and leave minorities, women, apostates, gay Muslims, completely defenseless. Sam Harris is right. The Islamophobia label has become a shield for bad ideas. No one hesitates to criticize Christianity for opposing gay marriage. Yet when secular bloggers in Bangladesh are hacked to death for writing against Islam, Western intellectuals look away, afraid to offend. If we can't name Islamism, we can't fight it. And if we can't fight it, then the most vulnerable people, the women under veils, the apostates in hiding, the gay teenagers in fear, are the ones who pay the price.
One of the good things that's come from, for me, that's come from our dialogue is that at least I'm sensing that the emphasis has shifted from one about the metaphysical conversation about whether God really exists or not, to the political and social values that we need for just and stable societies. And that's where I'd like to see the conversation go. Because I think the metaphysical conversation about whether God exists or not is less interesting to me. What's more interesting is that you can have the Church of England in the United Kingdom, but they won't be chopping people's heads off, and they won't be lashing people like Raif Badawi just for writing a blog in Saudi Arabia. And so if we can get to that stage, then we can have these conversations without fear of attack and and lynch mobs coming to the doors. So I'd like that emphasis, and I think this book leads to that. I don't know if you agree, Sam, but I think that what comes from this dialogue is that the emphasis is very clear and loud, is on reasserting liberalism and civil liberties and human rights that cut both ways. Not just in favor of minority communities, but also in certain instances, minority communities have responsibilities to others, to mainstream society, to reciprocate those civil liberties in their interactions. And I think that's the focus that I'd like to continue through these dialogues with others, to make it sort of a real focus on liberalism and values and ideas rather than whether God exists or not.
But Sam, I think that's right, and the substance of the book gets into that. Sam, though, you highlight in the book that the two basic tenets of Islam, it's hatred or rejection of infidels and this notion of a post-earth paradise, means that linking Islam with liberalism, right, with gay rights, women's rights, whatever you want to call it, may be desirable, but it's essentially based on a pretense. It's essentially intellectually dishonest. Is that fair, or do you think that they are compatible?
Well, the path forward that Majid really found in our conversation, and you'll see that it took some effort to convince me to sort of follow him through that, keyhole-sized aperture in this just wall of medieval ignorance, is that basically that by the lights of Islam, there is no true Islam. There's no pope. There's no place to stand within Islam to say that your view of the faith is the truly canonical one. And so there is a radical kind of pluralism there, which reformers can take advantage of, where you can say, listen, this whatever, you can be as doctrinaire as you want. You can be right of Mullah Omar in terms of your theological commitments, but what you can't be is someone who thinks that applies to all Muslims for all time. Now, I remain quite skeptical that we can have conversations with people of Mullah Omar's sort. We're not going to have a dialogue with al-Baghdadi or the rest of ISIS, but as a general matter, from Majid's side, that the way forward is to recognize that this pluralism demands a commitment to secularism. It demands, because there is no one version of Islam, you can't, you have to keep your version in this zero-sum contest with all these other versions out of public policy and out of politics. And then that commitment to secularism can hopefully open a space for genuine liberalism and a genuine commitment to all these other values that we want, which aren't best expressed in any religion, frankly. They're the result of a modern conversation about ethics and politics and human rights.
Yeah, I think you've just done a wonderful job summarizing my stance there, so I won't repeat it. But I think it's important, if you read the dialogue, you'll see that there are some surprising positions that traditional Islamic theologians have taken, which have been very literalist stances, but have led to very liberal outcomes. I'll just mention one, and I think it's important at this stage for me to say, look, I'm not a religious leader. I'm not even devout. I want to make that very clear. Some of you will see me, and you'll see me doing things that aren't typically devout. I won't elaborate. But that's because I don't claim to be devout or religious. I am a Muslim who is not devout. Secondly, I don't speak on behalf of all Muslims. I'm not a leader for Muslims. I'm not a religious leader. I'm not a community representative. In fact, I find the whole concept of community representatives troubling and problematic. In particular, they tend to be aging men, graying men who are especially socially conservative, who deign to speak on behalf of everyone. So I don't subscribe to that model in the first place. So I don't want anyone to think what I say means all Muslims must think this. But that's part of the beauty, you see. That's exactly what I'm advocating, to open that debate up to pluralism. We have within Islamic history and theology a concept, because there's no clergy, as Sam mentioned, that if anybody subscribes to a religious injunction and they are correct, they get 2 rewards. فَلَهُ أَجْرًا. And if they are incorrect, فَمَنْ أَخْطَأَ فَلَهُ أَجْرٌ. They still rewarded 1. Because that process of legal interpretation from the scripture is not wrong if you're legally qualified to do it. And the rest of the people, known as the awam, the followers, the muqallideen, those who follow a theologian, aren't judged for whichever option they choose. So there's one example I'll give you from the dialogue that I mentioned in discussion with Sam. And that is that from the earliest exegesis of the Quran, from the earliest tafsir, the Hanafi school of law, comes a man known as Abu Bakr al-Jassas, who was the first mufassir, or the first exegete of the Quran to elaborate and explain upon its meanings. And he took a very literalist view of the word khamr in Arabic, which is commonly translated today to mean alcohol. He took a very literalist approach to that word, and he didn't budge from its linguistic meaning, which was, and everyone concedes this point, by the way, that originally khamr only meant grape wine, the wine from grapes. It doesn't mean whiskey, it doesn't mean gin, it doesn't mean beer, it only means the wine from grapes. And the early Hanafis, which was the first school of jurisprudence, I must emphasize, the closest in the times of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, say that therefore every other form of alcohol is legal apart from grape wine. Now that sounds like a particularly outright position today when considering where the state of affairs are for the vast majority of Muslims who don't touch any form of alcohol. But I give this example not to take a position on it, but simply to emphasize something. And that is that form of pluralism that existed in those early years, that has been lost because of the rise of both fundamentalism and Islamism, and I distinguish between the two in the dialogue. The only way forward is for us to recognize that. And of course, relative to medieval periods, it may have been good, but actually there's a lot in the medieval time that we don't want to reclaim. But we have to just recognize that exists because no one has the right to claim that they have the definitive view on any scripture, on any text. So the logical conclusion from all of this can only be secularism, because there's no pope in Islam. And that's essentially, in a nutshell, what I'm arguing in the dialogue with Sam, and what I hope that Sam has kind of recognized in what I'm saying as well.
What makes this final stretch so important is that it exposes the heart of the issue. The real challenge isn't whether God exists, but whether Islam can ever coexist with liberal values like human rights and freedom of speech. Harris is right to press the point. When you read the Quran and Hadith plainly, you don't find tolerance or universal love. You find repeated commands to separate from or even fight against unbelievers. The promise of paradise for martyrdom gives extremists a divine license to kill, and no amount of reinterpretation can erase that. History shows this clearly. Christianity, for all its dark chapters, went through the Reformation and the Enlightenment, producing societies where religion was forced out of politics. That shift allowed space for free thought and modern values to develop. Islam never had its enlightenment. Instead, it hardened around dogma, and the pluralism Majid describes was crushed by fundamentalists. Even when scholars disagreed in early centuries, like those who argued that only grape wine was forbidden while other alcohols were permissible, that kind of intellectual diversity has been suffocated by Wahhabi literalism. The reality is that because Islam has no central authority, anyone can claim their view is authentic, which means reformers are left competing with jihadists who use the same scripture. That's why Harris is right to say the only viable way forward is secularism. Liberal values, free speech, women's rights, gay rights, are not rooted in Islam. They are born out of modern secular ethics that rejected religious authority altogether. Without secularism, pluralism is just a slogan, because power always drifts back to those who enforce the harshest interpretation. And that leads us to the bigger question. Can Islam ever truly reform itself? Or is secularism the only way to protect freedom and human dignity? I'd love to hear your thoughts. Drop them in the comments, and if you value these kinds of deep conversations, don't forget to like this video, subscribe, and share it with others so we can keep the discussion alive.